In today's video, we'll set up the Raspberry Pi 5 M.2 HAT with an NVMe SSD and install it into a CanaKit case. Adding an NVMe drive to the PCIe port will improve the reliability as well as the read-write speeds over a typical microSD. I'll step you through the entire process from beginning to end. I'm John, and welcome to Wagner's Tech Talk. If you would rather purchase a Pi 5 with the Pi HAT and NVMe drive all pre-installed for you, that option is available from CanKit. I'll also have links for you below should you need them. The assembly process is pretty easy, and I'll step you through the entire setup in this video. I would like to express a big thank you to CanKit for providing all the components shown here. To start, you will need a Pi 5. The one shown here has the active cooler installed. Adding it is easy. Just pop in the two standoffs and attach the fan to the connector on the Pi. You'll also need a microSD for installing PiOS desktop. If you need a more general getting started guide, I'll place a link in the upper right to a video that will assist with that. We'll use the black CanaKit case for the Raspberry Pi 5. I like it since it's super easy to assemble and fits the Pi 5 perfectly. It comes in three pieces: the top cover, the middle section, and the base. We will also install the official Pi M.2 HAT Plus. After installing the HAT, the cover won't fit, and for that reason we'll also attach the case extender. This extender also includes a heatsink and a fan, but we don't need it for this install since we're already using the Pi Active Cooler. But you could use it if you didn't want to use the Active Cooler. All we really need from this is the extender, which will fit on top of the middle section of the case. We'll go over that shortly, but first, let's install the Pi HAT and NVMe drive. Next, we'll install the Pi HAT and NVMe M.2 SSD. To get started, we'll need the official Raspberry Pi M.2 HAT Plus, as well as an M.2 NVMe 2242 SSD PCIe drive. The one I'll be using is a 512GB M.2 that is 22 by 42 millimeters in size. Inside the box is the HAT and some accessories that we'll need to complete the installation. For example, we'll use these standoffs and screws to secure the HAT to the Pi and the silver screw to mount the NVMe drive. The GPIO extender is optional if you plan to use the GPIO pins, but we'll install that also. But first, remove the tape from the back of the HAT. This is the location where we'll install the NVMe drive. There isn't much on the back of the board. From the bag containing the standoffs, take the small silver screw, position the NVMe drive at a 30-degree angle, and insert it into the connector, noting the keyed in at the top. Then place the silver screw into the groove of the drive in the middle of the screw and tighten it to the board. It should look like this. Take the Pi 5 with the active cooler installed and insert the GPIO connector over the pins. Then push the connector all the way flush. You may find it easier to use a small screwdriver to bring it all the way down. You'll find two different size screws. We'll use the four longer screws, inserting from the bottom upwards, and twist the standoff until it's secured to the Pi. Then simply repeat for the three remaining standoffs and screws. The PCIe connector has a small black latch. Gently use two fingernails to raise the black latch on the connector. Then insert the cable from the HAT, pushing it all the way down into the connector and lock it into place by pressing down on the latch. The cable should now be fully secured to the Pi. If you installed the GPIO pin extender, insert the pins into the board, and if you didn't, simply align the HAT over the standoffs. Using four of the smaller screws, secure the HAT to the standoffs. I recommend installing them diagonally like this, as it'll make lining up the other two screws and standoffs a bit easier. If you're using the CanaKit case, we'll install the Pi 5 into the case next. If you're not using the CanaKit case, you can go ahead and skip to the next segment. Take the bottom portion of the case with the cutout for the microSD slot and install the Pi at a slight angle and push it down fully to seat it. Now slide the middle section of the case over the ports and connectors and snap it into place. Install the extender such that the grooved edges fit into the middle section and snap it together. Lastly, add the top cover to the case, and now the assembly is complete. In the next segment, we'll install the operating system. Now we'll install Pi Desktop to a microSD. The software we'll use to write the PiOS desktop image to our microSD card is called Raspberry Pi Imager, and it's a free download. Simply open a browser on your computer and visit raspberrypi.com/software. Scroll down a little ways and you'll find download links for the various operating systems such as Windows, Mac OS, Ubuntu x86, and for the Raspberry Pi itself. Select the link for your computer and simply follow the prompts to install Pi Imager to your computer. Insert the microSD card into your computer using either a USB reader or a microSD adapter and launch Raspberry Pi Imager. Now click the Choose Device button and select Raspberry Pi 5. Click the Choose OS button and select Raspberry Pi OS 64-bit. And finally, click the Choose Storage button and select the microSD card. Click Next, and when asked if you want to apply OS customization settings, click No. If you're sure you've selected the correct microSD card, click Yes to begin writing the image. Pi Imager will then download and install the image to the microSD card. This process will take a bit of time, so I'll skip forward. Now that the image has been written, click the Continue button and close out a Pi Imager. You can now safely eject your microSD card. Then, insert the microSD card into the Pi 5. I'll use the official Pi keyboard and mouse and plug it into one of the black USB 2.0 ports. Now connect the micro HDMI cable into the HDMI port nearest the USB-C power input. Then connect the USB-C power and the Pi 5 will begin to boot. We'll now transition to video capture for a closer look. After Pi Desktop starts up, click Next. Set your country, language, and time zone. I'll also check Use English Language and Use US Keyboard and click Next. Enter a username and a password twice for logging into the Pi and then click Next. Select your Wi-Fi network or SSID and click Next. Enter the password for your network and click Next. You have the choice of either Chromium or Firefox for your default browser. I'll leave it set for Chromium and click Next. Raspberry Pi Connect will allow you to remotely connect up to the Pi from another computer. That's a topic for another day. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see a video on how to set it up. We'll leave it unchecked for now and click Next. I highly recommend updating the operating system here and not skipping this step. Click Next to proceed. This process will take some time, so I'll skip forward. Once the update is completed, click the OK button and then the Restart button. The Pi will reboot and the microSD will now have the latest version of PiOS installed. After the Pi starts back up, we'll now see the desktop interface. If you skipped here and already had Pi Desktop installed, let's make sure the latest updates have been applied. Open a terminal window and then type sudo sudo apt update and press enter. Then type sudo sudo apt upgrade and again press enter. This will make sure you have the latest software installed. If any updates are found, you may need to restart. In this case, there were no new updates to install and we can close the terminal. Now we could go through all the steps that we just performed by launching Raspberry Pi Imager and installing to the NVMe M.2 SSD. However, I'll show you an easier method. But before we install PiOS to the NVMe M.2 SSD, let's check the speed of the microSD so we can later compare it with the speed of the NVMe drive. Select Accessories and Raspberry Pi Diagnostics. The SD card speed test will use our boot device, which at present is the microSD. Just click the Run Test button to begin the test. Once done, click the Show Log button and we can see the results of the test. We'll compare these results in a few moments. For now, I'll save this file to the microSD and close out of Pi Diagnostics. Next, we'll copy Pi Desktop to the NVMe M.2 SSD. Since we have Pi Desktop installed and updated on the microSD, we'll just copy or clone it to the NVMe SSD to avoid having to go through the entire installation process again. To do that, select Accessories and then SD card copier. For the Copy from Device option, select the microSD card. It should be the one that does not have NVMe in the name, but instead MMC. For the Copy to Device, select the one that includes NVMe in the name. Now click the Start button to begin the copy of the microSD to the NVMe SSD drive. You'll then be prompted that this will erase all the contents on the NVMe. If you're good with that, click the Yes button. This process will take a few minutes, so I'll skip ahead. Now just click OK and close out of the SD card copier. In this next step, we'll need to set up the NVMe drive as the boot device. Open a terminal window and type sudo sudo raspi -config and press enter. Move down to Advanced Options and select Boot Order. Select the option for NVMe or USB boot. The bootloader will then be updated. Press enter on OK. Then press the Tab key and select the Finish button and Yes to reboot now. We no longer need the microSD card and can remove it. The Pi 5 will now boot directly from the NVMe SSD. When it comes to boot times, the top is booting from the microSD and the bottom from the NVMe SSD. In this test, the boot time was nearly 6 seconds faster with the NVMe drive when you count the point when the Wi-Fi network became active in the upper right. I also performed the same speed test after booting from the NVMe SSD. Let's compare the results. The numbers in the upper left are the results for sequential read and write, as well as random 4K read and write. On the right is the raw test results, with the top numbers from the microSD test and the bottom from the NVMe SSD. When charting those results, you can see a substantial difference between the blue bars resulting from the microSD test versus the NVMe test, which is in orange. Using the PCI Express port with the NVMe drive is significantly faster than the microSD I/O in all cases. That brings us to the end of another video. If you found it helpful, I would appreciate it if you let me know by clicking the like button. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel and want to see more content like this in the future, I hope you'll consider doing so. Again, I would like to express a huge thank you to CanaKit for supplying the components that were shown in this video. And with that, I look forward to talking with you again very soon.